and be committed to go deep. But you see, there's another weird thing in the Tao that pertains to this emptiness, and that is, it's not so much, and Heidegger knew all of this, that it's not so much as you continually going thrashing through the forest and you pursuing. It's almost a you sitting and letting it come to you. There's also an embrace aspect to the empathy. There's not just you going and discovering and you going, because there's a weird falsity in that as well. And we talked, this was one of the big themes of Path of the Fool, is that the charioteer, the searcher, the fool, is he moving because he really has legitimate goals? Is that why the Path of the Fool exists? Is searching, and the chariot and the wheels on the cobbles? Or is that just a sort of self-deception? And it's just the need to move, period. It's just action for its own sake. And this will explain a lot of solar cards like the Emperor and whatever. And then there's counterpointing passive cards like Justice and the High Priestess and the Hanged Man. There seems to be a weird dualism here between the active going, which presumes to have a goal, but does it really? Is it just action for its own sake? So when we look at the world, we see this, the building of horizons, bridges, and the high rises and the infrastructures and all. It does seem to be a lot of fucking action without any particular goal, or the goal is just thrown there to convince people, to hypnotize people, and yet it seems to be industry, like one of these Escher paintings. Yet in the middle of it, and you can get lost in your roles and your duties and your sort of hyper extrovert, outer directed goals. But at the same time, there's another place that says, wait a minute, if I just sit quiet, right? If I give myself real rest, real pause, real breath, is there not another thing that might seek me out or come to me? Maybe I should try that again. So there's another meditation, is the Buddha who sits under the tree and says, let me just see what comes along. And somebody in the Western world looks at that as very passive. But wait a minute, don't you see that it's not? Because our world is so hyper extroverted, sometimes you need to swing in the other direction for a while. I'm not saying you give up progress and you give up all of that. There's something beautiful about that too. But there's also a need to balance it as well by just simply being and being in inaction for a while, so that you can sort of ground yourself, come back to ground zero, and lay down some of the projects and contemplate, am I just doing this so I have, continual activity all the time? Which is burning me out in another way, exhausting me in another way? Am I doing it because I'm comparing myself to others and competing with others in the sort of a negative sense? I mean, all of these are the great thoughts we have to have. And don't always be waiting for an easy, manual that gives you the answer. These are all things that have to be organically brought up from within, and then you're finding your own settings. But basically, the key is sensitivity. The materialistic paradigm cannot be uninstalled from people who are insensitive. And so then don't bother, talking to them. You can lay some stuff out and they read it if they want, but largely they're not going to get it. So you just have to continue your life process. The focus must be, you must continue day by day, to awaken your sensitivity. And that will mean music, and that will mean art, and that will mean nature. It's not rocket science. It will mean those things. It will mean being around the animals and the inanimate, and it'll open new senses, to that inanimate world, because it's speaking to you all the time. And it's actually speaking to you in a very peculiar and brilliant way. It's a voice of the Logos, but it speaks to you on a deeper, mammalian, like a level of the cortex, to the deeper cerebrum. This is the old ancestral. It's what we call the id. It's what was misnamed the id, the unconscious. It's not a bestial place at all. It's the place of the roots of our own being. And Mother Nature is speaking to us, below the levels of the ego, and we need to take off this veneer of being in fear of our own roots. Bruce was talking about this, the deep fear of our own being, autophobia, and open up these deep, dark sort of reservoirs which need to be nurtured again. They're trying to pull us into this Apollonian world with their light and their movies and their flashing images, and we're being uprooted, from the sort of the reservoir, the sort of unconscious, the true unconscious reservoir on which all of us stand. This is and that's just another way of saying the sensitivity, and that requires introspection, and it requires a different relationship with time, and certainly a different relationship with nature. But we'll be getting into all of this again. This is the stuff we're going to be exploring as we go, through the different weeks and months.